I am Diana, 34 years old, and today I watched my 5-year marriage shatter right in my own living room. My husband was in the shower when his phone lit up on the nightstand. The message read, "Last night meant everything to me." I calmly picked up the device and texted back, "Come over, she is gone." When the doorbell rang 20 minutes later, I instantly wished I had not done that. Not because I was afraid of confronting his mistress, but because what waited on my porch was a betrayal deeper than I ever could have imagined. Let me take you back a few hours. I am a senior director of global supply chain for a major e-commerce corporation based in Seattle. My job involves managing complex logistics, negotiating international contracts, and anticipating disasters long before they strike. My husband, Brandon, who is 36, is the chief executive officer of a tech startup that is currently making headlines across the financial sector. For our entire marriage, Brandon and his family have treated me like a simple, hard-working wage slave. I drive a 6-year-old Toyota Camry. I wear sensible blazers instead of flashy designer brands. I quietly pay the utility bills and the mortgage, while Brandon spends his venture capital funding on expensive dinners, luxury cars, and networking trips. They think I am just a boring, practical woman who lacks ambition and business acumen. They have absolutely no idea that I am the anonymous angel investor who quietly saved Brandon's failing company 2 years ago. Through a blind trust, I hold 60% of his equity. I am his majority shareholder, his silent boss, and the true owner of the technology he claims to have invented. My flight to a supply chain conference in Chicago had been canceled at the last minute due to a massive winter storm sweeping across the Pacific Northwest. Instead of spending the night in a hotel, I navigated the icy roads back to our upscale suburban home, hoping to surprise my husband. The house was warm and quiet when I walked in. I could hear the faint sound of the shower running in the master bathroom upstairs. I smiled, dropping my suitcase by the door, and walked into our bedroom to unpack. That was when I saw his phone resting on the nightstand. The screen illuminated the darkened room, displaying a push notification that made my blood run instantly cold. The name on the screen was Ashley. The message was unmistakable in its intimacy. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the water cascading in the shower just a few feet away. A lesser woman might have screamed. A more emotional woman might have banged on the bathroom door, demanding answers and sobbing into her hands. But my career has trained me to handle catastrophic supply chain failures with absolute precision. I do not react to emergencies with panic. I gather data, I assess the damage, and I neutralize the threat. I picked up his phone. He had not changed his passcode in 3 years. I unlocked it and scrolled through months of messages. Ashley was 24 years old, a social media influencer who apparently spent her days taking selfies in my husband's leased sports car. The messages detailed weekend getaways I thought were business trips, expensive gifts funded by our joint accounts, and cruel jokes about my modest wardrobe and long working hours. Without a tremor in my hands, I typed the response. "Come over. She is gone." I set the phone back on the nightstand, exactly where I found it, and walked downstairs to wait. I brewed a cup of black coffee, sat at the kitchen island, and watched the snow fall heavily outside our bay windows. 20 minutes later, the chime of the doorbell echoed through the silent house. I set my coffee mug down, smoothed the wrinkles from my simple gray trousers, and walked to the front door. I expected to find a young, nervous girl standing on my welcome mat. I was prepared to look her in the eye, hand her my husband's packed suitcase, and close the door on my marriage. But when I pulled the heavy oak door open, the freezing winter wind rushed in, carrying with it a scene so absurd and grotesque that I momentarily forgot how to breathe. Ashley was indeed standing there. She was exactly as her photos depicted, young, heavily made up, and wrapped in a designer winter coat that I recognized from a recent charge on Brandon's credit card. But she was not alone. Standing to her right, holding two large cardboard boxes overflowing with designer clothing, was my mother-in-law, Patricia. To her left was my brother-in-law, Kevin, struggling to balance a massive tiered bakery box. Through the clear plastic window of the box, I could read the elegant frosting that spelled out, "Welcome the new lady of the house." 5 people. 2 families. One massive orchestrated conspiracy against me. For a fraction of a second, absolute silence hung in the freezing air. Kevin nearly dropped the cake. Ashley's smug, victorious smile faltered as she shrank back slightly. But Patricia, a 62-year-old woman who had always viewed my working-class background with unconcealed disgust, recovered with terrifying speed. She did not look embarrassed. She did not look guilty. She simply adjusted the collar of her cashmere coat and looked down her nose at me. "Well," Patricia sneered, her voice cutting through the howling wind, "if you are home, you might as well pack your bags and give up the master bedroom. Do not make this harder than it has to be, Diana." I did not scream. I did not ask how she could do this. I simply stepped back and opened the door wider, inviting the betrayal to step inside my home. Patricia marched past me, her boots tracking dirty snow onto the hardwood floor I had paid for. Ashley followed, clinging to Patricia's arm like a frightened child playing the victim, while Kevin lugged the cake and boxes to the kitchen counter. I closed the door against the storm, turning to face the 3 of them, just as heavy footsteps pounded down the wooden staircase. Brandon appeared on the landing, hastily tying a white towel around his waist. Water dripped from his hair onto his broad shoulders. He froze when he saw the gathering in the foyer. His eyes darted from his mother to his pregnant mistress to his brother and finally settled on me. I watched the panic flash across his face, the sudden realization that his 2 carefully separated worlds had just violently collided. I waited for the apologies. I waited for the desperate backpedaling or the shame that any normal human being would exhibit when caught in such a monumental lie. Instead, I watched my husband make the worst miscalculation of his entire life. Brandon straightened his posture, pushing his wet hair back from his forehead, and actively chose his family's side. "Diana, do not make a scene," Brandon commanded, his voice, adopting that arrogant, authoritative tone he used during his tech pitches. "I did not plan for you to find out this way, but since you are here, we might as well get this over with." I crossed my arms over my chest. "I am not making a scene, Brandon. I am just trying to understand why your mother brought a welcome cake for your mistress on a Tuesday evening." Patricia stepped forward, placing a protective hand over Ashley's flat stomach. "Do not speak to my son in that tone, Diana. He has been more than patient with you. You have been married for 5 years. 5 years, and you have not given this family a single child. You are too busy playing corporate executive at your little logistics job to be a proper wife. Brandon needs a family. He needs an heir." "An heir?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow at the sheer theatricality of her words. "Yes, an heir," Patricia declared proudly, patting Ashley's shoulder. "Ashley is 3 months pregnant. She is carrying the true heir to Brandon's legacy. My son's company is about to be acquired for $50 million. He is about to become a major player in the tech industry. He cannot have a barren, bargain-shopping wage slave dragging down his public image. He needs a young, vibrant family to match his new status." I looked at Brandon. He did not flinch. He actually stood taller, puffing out his chest at the mention of his impending $50 million buyout. He truly believed he was a titan of industry, a self-made genius who had outgrown the quiet, supportive wife who had seemingly contributed nothing but steady utility payments to his empire. "Look," Diana, Brandon said, adopting the polished tone he used during investor pitches. "The buyout closes next week, and my lawyers advised me to separate my personal liabilities before the final diligence review. I plan to serve you when you return from Chicago. Since you are here, we can finish it tonight." He opened the briefcase on the hall table and placed two documents beside the ridiculous welcome cake. The first was a quitclaim deed for the Seattle house. The second was a proposed marital settlement that waived support and required each spouse to keep the company's trust debts and future earnings held in that spouse's own name. Brandon had even opened a remote online notarization session on his tablet so he could claim the signatures were voluntary and properly witnessed. "You will sign the house over to me," he said. "In exchange, I will pay the remaining $30,000 on your student loans and let you keep the Toyota." That is generous, considering I built a multi-million-dollar company while you tracked shipping containers. Kevin leaned against the refrigerator and laughed. "Fight him, and the corporate lawyers will bury you until you cannot afford rent. Take the student loan money and leave." Ashley glanced toward the staircase, as if she already owned it. "We need the primary bedroom for the nursery. The natural light is perfect." I read every page. Brandon had listed his startup, his corporate accounts, and the house as assets he intended to keep. He had also demanded a broad mutual waiver covering every trust holding company and separately titled asset that either spouse had failed to list. He believed that language protected his future sale. In reality, it protected the structures he did not know I controlled. They expected tears. They expected bargaining. Patricia wanted the satisfaction of watching me beg before she pushed me into the storm. Instead, I removed the Mont Blanc pen Brandon had given me on our second anniversary. The remote notary appeared on the tablet, confirmed my identity, and asked whether anyone was forcing me to sign. Brandon stood just outside the camera frame with Kevin at his shoulder and Ashley beside the welcome cake. "Are you certain this is what you want?" I asked Brandon. "You want a clean break, no claim against anything held by the other person, and no later attempt to reopen the financial division." "I am certain," he said. "Sign it, Diana. Do not make me destroy you in court." I looked directly into the tablet camera and stated that I understood the documents. Then I signed the deed, initialed the mutual waivers, and executed the settlement proposal with the calm efficiency of a woman approving a shipping manifest. The notary completed the electronic certificate and closed the session. When I pushed the papers across the granite counter, Brandon stared at my signature as if he had expected the pen to stop working. "Done," I said. Kevin slapped the counter and called my compliance proof that I had never possessed the courage to challenge a successful man. Patricia let out a long, theatrical sigh of relief. "Finally. Now that the unpleasantness is over, you need to leave. We have a lot of unpacking to do for Ashley, and I do not want your negative energy ruining the baby's new home." Kevin stepped up, puffing out his chest to loom over me. "You have 30 minutes to pack your trash and get out of our sight. If you are not out of here by the time I finish a slice of that cake, I am throwing your bags out into the snow myself." I did not argue. I turned my back on the four of them and walked calmly up the stairs to the master bedroom. I pulled my medium-sized travel suitcase from the closet and began packing. I did not take the jewelry Brandon had bought me. I did not take the expensive evening gowns I wore to his corporate galas. I packed exactly what I had brought into this marriage 5 years ago: my practical clothes, my comfortable shoes, and my personal toiletries. I walked into the adjoining home office. This was where Brandon supposedly did his genius coding, but it was also where I managed the household finances. I opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet and pulled out a heavy, heavily scratched external hard drive. It was an old piece of hardware, completely unassuming, but it was the only thing in this entire house that truly mattered. I slipped it into the front pocket of my laptop bag. When I walked back downstairs 25 minutes later, my suitcase rolling quietly behind me, the scene in the living room was predictably sickening. Brandon had put on sweatpants and a t-shirt and was sitting on the sofa with Ashley curled into his side. Patricia was taking photos of them, cooing about how beautiful they looked together. Kevin was at the kitchen counter, stuffing a large piece of cake into his mouth. I paused by the front door and pulled my car keys from my purse. "I am taking the Toyota," I announced. "And I am taking the old hard drive from the bottom desk drawer. It has my college projects on it." Brandon barely looked away from the television. "Take the junk car, Diana. I am keeping the Tesla anyway. And take whatever garbage is in that desk. Just leave the house keys on the console. And do not ever come crawling back when you realize how hard the real world is for a single aging woman with no ambition. Enjoy the house, Brandon," I said softly. "I really hope the $50 million buyout goes smoothly for you." I opened the front door and stepped out into the raging blizzard. The wind whipped my hair across my face, biting into my skin, but I had never felt warmer. I pulled my suitcase through the accumulating snow, loaded it into the trunk of my reliable old Toyota, and climbed into the driver's seat. Before starting the engine, I removed the spare phone Brandon had insisted I carry because it was enrolled in his family location-sharing account. I disabled the service, removed my personal data, and dropped the useless device into the storm drain opening beside the curb. He would not be following my movements through a tracker he controlled. I rolled the window up, turned on the car heater, and reached for my laptop bag in the passenger seat. I pulled out the scratched external hard drive and plugged it into my computer. The screen booted up, bypassing the standard operating system entirely, requesting a highly encrypted password that only one person in the world knew. I typed the password. The screen flashed green, and lines of dense code began populating the display. At the very top of the interface, bold white letters proudly announced the truth that my ex-husband was too arrogant to ever discover. Apex Holdings. Source code for Brandon Tech. Access level, Administrator. What Brandon did not know was that the core algorithm his entire company relied on was written, patented, and legally owned by me before we ever got married. He did not know that Apex Holdings, the conglomerate offering to buy his company for $50 million, was a blind trust fully controlled by me. Most importantly, Brandon's settlement did not transfer my pre-existing trust or Apex Holdings to him. It waived later claims against separately titled entities once the court reviewed the agreement. By trying to isolate his imagined windfall, he created written evidence that my trust, its equity, and its liabilities remained outside his reach. I put the car in drive, tires crunching over the fresh snow, and drove away from the house I would never see again. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and my family-in-law had absolutely no idea that their spectacular downfall was already in motion. The winter storm raged violently outside, burying the Seattle suburbs under a thick blanket of white ice. But inside, the private elevator ascending to the top floor of the downtown high-rise, the air was perfectly climate-controlled and silent. I stepped out of the brushed steel doors and walked into the massive $8 million penthouse that I owned entirely in cash. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, the Space Needle cutting through the swirling snow in the distance. The interior was sleek modern and completely devoid of the suffocating, overly decorated aesthetic my mother-in-law preferred. This was my sanctuary, a fortress bought and paid for by my own sheer willpower, entirely hidden from the man I had just left. Victor was already waiting for me at the long marble dining table. At 48 years old, he was arguably the most ruthless and brilliant financial lawyer on the West Coast. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, looking wide awake despite the fact that it was barely past dawn. Spread across the table in front of him were dozens of heavily redacted financial portfolios and glowing tablets displaying real-time market analytics. "Rough night?" Victor asked, looking up from a spreadsheet. He pushed a steaming mug of black coffee toward the empty leather chair opposite him. "Just taking out the trash," I replied smoothly. I took off my snow-damp coat, draped it over a chair, and pulled the scratched external hard drive from my laptop bag. I slid it across the smooth marble surface. "The source code is intact." He did not even blink when I walked out with it. He was too busy celebrating his impending buyout with his pregnant mistress and his greedy mother. Victor caught the hard drive, a sharp smile touching the corners of his mouth. He plugged the device into his encrypted terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard to verify the contents. He actually signed the quitclaim deed. He signed the divorce papers without contesting the asset division. He practically shoved the pen into my hand. I said, taking a slow sip of the rich coffee. He truly believes he outsmarted me. He thinks by forcing me to sign those waivers, he is protecting his $50 million windfall from a boring, unambitious wife. 2 years ago, Brandon's company was days away from catastrophic insolvency. He had burned through his initial seed money playing the role of a hotshot Silicon Valley visionary, leasing luxury office spaces and buying expensive sports cars, while his development team struggled to make his flawed product function. I remember him sitting on our kitchen floor at 2 a.m, crying into his hands because every venture capitalist in the city had rejected his funding pitches. He was terrified of looking like a failure in front of his mother. I took pity on him. Using my expertise in global supply chain logistics, I quietly rewrote the core algorithm his team had been butchering. Then, utilizing an offshore blind trust managed by Victor, I created a faceless corporate entity named Apex Holdings. Apex swooped in, injected $3 million of my own hard-earned capital into his failing startup, and secured 60% equity in return. Brandon was so desperate for a savior that he never looked closely at the paperwork. He signed away majority control to a holding company, completely unaware that the billionaire angel investor saving his skin was the same woman packing his lunch every morning. Victor pushed a thick red folder across the table, breaking me out of my memories. You will want to read this immediately. Our internal auditing team finalized their report at midnight. I opened the red folder. It was the preliminary due diligence audit of Brandon's tech company, conducted by Apex Holdings, ahead of the $50 million acquisition scheduled for next week. I flipped through the pages, my eyes tracking the highlighted columns and glaring red flags scattered throughout the financial statements. The numbers do not align, I stated, frowning at a particularly inflated quarterly revenue projection. They do not align because he is cooking the books, Victor said flatly, leaning back in his chair. Your soon-to-be ex-husband has been falsifying active user metrics for the past 8 months. He is creating phantom accounts to inflate the company's daily engagement statistics. Worse, he is funneling corporate funds into shadow accounts to hide massive personal debts. We found charges for luxury vacations, designer jewelry, and private medical bills, all disguised as software development expenses. He is artificially pumping up the valuation to trick Apex Holdings into finalizing the $50 million buyout. If Brandon signs the final acquisition documents while certifying false user metrics, false ownership, and false financial statements, the exposure becomes personal, Victor said. But Apex cannot knowingly close a fraudulent purchase or manufacture a crime. We have to preserve the audit trail, suspend any transfer of funds, and give the independent directors a documented opportunity to correct the disclosures. I closed the red folder and looked through the glass at the storm swallowing Seattle. Brandon was sitting in my former home, celebrating as though the $50 million valuation already belonged to him. Do not cancel the process yet, I said. Continue the lawful due diligence schedule. Send the discrepancies to outside acquisition counsel, preserve every ledger, and require Brandon to sign a separate chief executive certification confirming the ownership of the source code and the accuracy of the financial statements. Do not hide the questions from him. Put them in writing and let him answer them. Victor studied me. If he repeats the lies after receiving direct questions, the record will show intent. Apex can reject the transaction, enforce its creditor and shareholder rights, and deliver the evidence to the proper agencies without exposing itself to the fraud. Exactly. If we stop now, he will tell everyone a jealous wife sabotaged a promising company. I want him to stand beside Patricia and Ashley, read the warnings, and choose greed anyway. Let him believe the buyout remains possible, but keep every dollar in escrow and every decision under independent review. I rose and walked toward the window. I want him to reach the highest point his own lies can carry him. Then I want the truth to remove the ladder. Victor's expression hardened into professional focus. I will revise the closing package. The board will receive the audit findings, Brandon will receive the certification questions, and no funds will move unless the disclosures are verified. If he lies again, the consequences will belong entirely to him. He would not be trapped by secret language. He would be confronted by clear questions, sworn answers, and the evidence he believed nobody could see. My phone vibrated violently on the marble table, shattering the quiet atmosphere. I walked back over and picked it up. It was an automated alert from Pacific Standard Bank. The joint credit account ending in 4 digits had been locked due to the primary account holder's request. I read the text aloud to Victor. I froze the joint cards. You signed away your rights, remember? The card is empty. Hope you have enough cash for a cheap motel. Try using Uber. I picked up my coffee mug, the warm ceramic soothing my hands. Let him enjoy his petty victories today. By next week, he will not even be able to afford a bus ticket. The next morning, my new private cell phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. It was Patricia. She demanded I meet her at the Azure Room, a pretentious, overpriced bistro in downtown Seattle, known for catering to the city elite. She stated it was urgent and pertained to the finalization of the divorce logistics. I knew exactly what she wanted. Brandon was terrified that I might ruin his pristine public image right before the acquisition, and he had sent his mother to do his dirty work. I put on a tailored navy suit, secured my hair in a sleek twist, and drove my reliable Toyota to the bistro. When I walked into the private dining area Patricia had reserved, I found her sitting at a corner table, bathed in morning sunlight. Sitting right next to her, sipping a brightly colored iced beverage, was Ashley. They looked like a parody of newly acquired wealth. Patricia wore a coat dripping with unnecessary fur accents, while Ashley was squeezed into a tight designer dress that prominently displayed a massive emerald-cut diamond ring on her left hand. As I approached the table, Ashley made a highly exaggerated gesture of brushing her hair behind her ear, ensuring the diamond caught the light from the window. I recognized the stone immediately. I also recognized the exact offshore shadow account Brandon had illegally drained to purchase it. "Sit down, Diana," Patricia commanded, gesturing vaguely to the empty chair opposite them. "We do not all day. Ashley has a prenatal yoga class at noon, and I have a fitting for the acquisition celebration gala." I pulled out the chair and sat down, ignoring the menu the waiter had left. "I am on a tight schedule myself, Patricia. What exactly do you want?" Patricia reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp cashier check. She slid it across the polished mahogany table toward me. It sat there, glaringly white against the dark wood. I glanced at the amount. $20,000. "Consider that a severance package," Patricia said, lifting her chin with absolute arrogance. "It is a youth fee, really. You wasted 5 of your best years pretending you could fit into our world. Now that Brandon is moving on to a woman who can actually provide him with an heir, we feel it is only fair to compensate you for your time." Ashley leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, the diamond flashing again. "Brandon is being incredibly generous, Diana. We just need you to sign a basic non-disclosure agreement, no social media posts about the divorce, no crying to local blogs about how he left you. You take the $20,000, you keep your mouth shut until the $50 million buyout is finalized next week, and we all walk away happy." Patricia tapped her manicured fingernail against the table. "Take the money, Diana. We know Brandon locked your joint credit cards. You are unemployed, you have no assets, and you are going to need a security deposit for whatever run-down apartment you end up renting. Just sign the agreement and save yourself the embarrassment of a public fight you cannot possibly win." Instead of reaching for a pen, I folded the thick bank paper precisely in half. Then I folded it again. With a sharp, deliberate motion, I tore the check straight down the middle. Patricia gasped, her eyes widening in shock. I tore the pieces again, reducing Brandon's generous severance package into useless scraps of paper. I picked up one of the jagged, stiff corners of the shredded check, raised it to my mouth, and casually used it to dislodge a non-existent speck from my teeth. "What is wrong with you?" Patricia shrieked, recoiling as if I had just thrown poison at her. "Are you insane? That was $20,000. I ignored her outrage and called Victor on speaker. "Pull the secondary mortgage file for 4420 Pinecrest Lane," I said. "I want the current default status, the cure deadline, and the trustee sale calendar." Patricia went still. "That was her address," Victor answered after a brief pause. "The Pinecrest loan has been in covenant default for 4 months. Formal notices were served before today. The cure period expires Thursday morning, and the loan documents prohibit the unauthorized boat lien Kevin placed against the property. Proceed exactly under the recorded documents I said. No shortcuts. If the arrears and the unauthorized lien are not cured by the deadline, continue the existing foreclosure process and preserve every notice." I ended the call. Ashley looked confused, but Patricia understood enough to lose the color beneath her makeup. 2 years earlier, Patricia had mortgaged the suburban estate to help Brandon cover payroll. When Apex later acquired the startup's secured debt, the mortgage traveled with the loan portfolio. Patricia then violated its covenants by pledging the same property for Kevin's speedboat and ignoring months of notices. I had not created her default during breakfast. I had simply stopped protecting her from it. "You are bluffing," Patricia whispered. "You are a supply chain employee. You cannot call my loan. You do not even know my bank manager." I leaned toward the shredded check floating in her water. "I do not need your bank manager. Apex owns the debt, and I control Apex. Your cure period was already running before you carried that welcome cake into my house." Ashley rolled her eyes and called me unstable, but Patricia remained seated. Her fear was fighting with her pride. "Apex is buying Brandon's company," she said, forcing a laugh. "You have nothing to do with people at that level." I stood and collected my purse. "Skip the gala fitting. By Thursday, you may need proof of payment, a lawyer, and moving boxes. The foreclosure team will follow the court and trustee process, but nobody at Apex will extend another private favor to your family." Patricia struck the table and shouted that I would never touch her home. I walked into the winter air without turning around. The house was not yet mine, and I had not pretended otherwise. But the notices were valid. The cure deadline was real, and the woman who had tried to throw me into a storm had finally learned that wealth could not erase a contract she had already broken. Patricia's mouth opened, but the polished insults she normally used would not come. She had assumed every financial document in her life was merely another prop Brandon could rearrange. Now she was hearing dates, notice periods, and covenant language that existed long before our meeting. "You are doing this because Ashley is younger than you," she finally said. "You are punishing an innocent family because my son chose a woman capable of giving him an heir." "No," I replied. "I am enforcing a debt your family knowingly stopped paying, while spending borrowed money on a boat, jewelry, and a celebration for a company built on false numbers. The difference between revenge and accountability is documentation, Patricia. I have every page." Ashley reached for Patricia's arm, suddenly eager to leave. I watched the diamond on her hand tremble as she pulled her chair back. I was barely halfway across the icy parking lot when my phone vibrated violently in my coat pocket. The screen flashed with Kevin's name. I unlocked my car door, slid into the driver's seat, and accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear as I turned the key in the ignition. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Kevin screamed into the receiver. His voice was so loud and frantic that I had to pull the phone an inch away from my ear. "You actually went to a restaurant and threatened my mother? You threatened Ashley. You are a pathetic, bitter woman who cannot handle being replaced by someone younger and better than you." I adjusted the climate control in my car, letting a blast of warm air defrost my numb fingers. "Kevin, I am incredibly busy today. If you are calling to cry about your luxury speedboat being repossessed, you will have to leave a message." "You listen to me, you crazy witch," Kevin snarled, his breathing heavy with rage. "Brandon is cutting you off completely, but I'm going a step further. I am the chief financial officer of this company. I manage the corporate benefits. I know your Uncle Thomas is sitting in that expensive assisted living facility in Bellevue, surviving entirely on the premium health insurance plan our company provides." "By 5 o'clock today, I am terminating that policy," Kevin declared, his tone dripping with malice. "I am going to make sure your sick elderly uncle gets dumped onto the freezing street before the weekend. That is what happens when you disrespect this family. We will break you until you have absolutely nothing left." I did not gasp. I did not plead. I simply ended the call, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. Uncle Thomas was my mother's brother, the only relative who had truly supported me when I was struggling to pay for my university tuition. He had suffered a severe stroke 3 years ago that left him requiring round-the-clock medical supervision. When Brandon's tech company initially secured its first round of minor funding, Brandon had grandly offered to put Uncle Thomas on the executive corporate health plan as a gesture of goodwill to my family. It was the one thing I had always been genuinely grateful to Brandon for. 45 minutes later, I pulled through the wrought iron gates of Bellevue Meadows, an exclusive high-end assisted living facility nestled among towering evergreen trees. The lobby was warm and smelled faintly of lavender and expensive floor wax. I walked directly to the administrative wing and requested an immediate meeting with the facility director, Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable was a stern, highly organized woman in her late 50s. She looked up from her computer in surprise when I walked into her office. "Diana, it is highly unusual to see you here on a weekday morning. Is everything all right with Thomas?" "Uncle Thomas is fine," I said, taking a seat across from her heavy mahogany desk. "I am here to restructure his financial accounts. I need to transition his billing off the corporate insurance plan immediately." Mrs. Gable blinked, adjusting her glasses. "Transition him, Diana. The monthly out-of-pocket costs for the premium medical wing are astronomical. Without the corporate insurance subsidizing the care, the burden on you will be immense. We require proof of financial solvency before we can authorize a private pay transition of this magnitude." I reached into my purse and pulled out a heavy, matte black titanium card. It bore no bank logo, no visible account numbers, and no flashy branding. It was a Tier 1 asset management card, linked directly to the Apex Holdings Offshore Trust, a card issued only to individuals with verified liquid assets exceeding 9 figures. I placed it gently on her desk. "I would like to pay for his continued care in full," I stated calmly. "Calculate the total cost for the highest level of medical care in this facility for the next 5 years. Include all physical therapy premium, dietary accommodations, and private nursing fees. Charge the entire 5-year sum to this card right now." After a few tense minutes, she handed me an itemized invoice. The total came to just over $480,000. I nodded, picked up her pen, and signed the authorization form without a second thought. She processed the black card through her terminal. The machine chirped pleasantly. The transaction was approved instantly, clearing nearly $500,000 in a fraction of a second. Mrs. Gable exhaled a long, shaky breath, handing the heavy card back to me with a newfound expression of absolute reverence. "The funds have cleared, Diana. Thomas is fully secured for the next 5 years." "Thank you," I said, slipping the card back into my purse. "Now I need to update the security protocols for my uncle. As his sole medical proxy, I am filing an official directive. Brandon and Kevin are permanently banned from this property. If either of them attempts to visit, call, or inquire about his medical status, facility security is to deny them entry and contact local law enforcement immediately for trespassing. I am incredibly glad you came in today and secured this payment, Diana, Mrs. Gable said, lowering her voice. To be completely honest with you, our legal department was preparing to initiate an emergency discharge for Thomas by the end of this month. I frowned, genuine confusion breaking through my calm facade. An emergency discharge? Why? The corporate insurance policy was supposed to cover everything until today. Mrs. Gable shook her head slowly, pushing the thick envelope toward me. The corporate insurance policy was canceled 14 months ago due to non-payment of premiums. I stared at her, my heart skipping a beat. That is impossible. Brandon has been claiming the assisted living expenses on his corporate tax filings every quarter. He showed me the payment confirmation letters. Mrs. Gable tapped the envelope. Those confirmation letters were fabricated. Brandon has been emailing our billing department forged bank routing numbers and fake wire transfer receipts to delay the collection process. He has not paid a single cent for Thomas's care in over a year. We have been sending past due notices to his corporate office, but Kevin, acting as the chief financial officer, kept responding with legal threats claiming the insurance company was at fault for the delay. We were essentially providing free care while trying to untangle a massive web of administrative lies. I reached out and opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of past due invoices, final warning letters, and printouts of emails from Kevin aggressively denying responsibility and threatening to sue the nursing home for harassment. Attached to these were the fake bank transfer receipts Brandon had generated to buy himself more time. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with terrifying clarity. Brandon and Kevin had canceled the health insurance policy over a year ago to save money. But Brandon had continued logging the massive nursing home expenses on his company's official financial ledgers as a tax-deductible employee benefit. He was claiming the expense on paper, but keeping the actual cash for himself to fund his luxury lifestyle and his affair with Ashley. May I keep these original documents for my records? I asked, looking up at Mrs. Gable with a completely blank expression. She nodded eagerly. Please do. Since the account balance is now fully settled, the facility considers the matter resolved on our end. But whoever falsified those bank documents has committed a very serious crime. You have been incredibly helpful today, Mrs. Gable. Please ensure my uncle gets his favorite dessert with lunch today. Victor, I said when he answered. I am going to need you to draft a new folder for the acquisition audit. I just found the embezzlement trail. And Victor, preserve the originals, Victor. If investigators obtain warrants, I want the chain of custody clean enough that neither brother can challenge a single page. 2 days later, the trap I had carefully laid began to snap shut, starting with a predictably arrogant text message from my soon-to-be ex-husband. He demanded I meet him at the Belmont, the most exclusive and outrageously expensive steakhouse in downtown Seattle. He claimed we needed to finalize a few minor administrative details before his monumental $50 million acquisition the following week. I knew exactly what this was. It was a power play. He wanted to parade his apparent victory in front of me one last time. I arrived at the Belmont wearing the exact same sensible gray trench coat and practical flats they had always mocked. The host escorted me to a private velvet-lined booth in the back of the restaurant. I was not entirely surprised to find that Brandon had not come alone. His entire toxic entourage was already there, celebrating with champagne and laughing loudly enough to disturb the other patrons. Look who decided to show up, Kevin snorted, pointing an oyster fork at me. Did you have to take the bus, or is that junk Toyota still running? Let us get straight to business, Diana Brandon said, adjusting his custom-tailored suit jacket. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a crisp legal document, sliding it across the white tablecloth. My lawyers drafted a non-disclosure agreement. You are going to sign it tonight. It strictly prohibits you from speaking to the media, posting on social media, or discussing my company, my personal life, or this divorce with anyone." Ashley leaned forward, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We just cannot risk you having an emotional breakdown and going to the press, Diana. Brandon is about to be a very important man in the tech industry. He needs a pristine public image. And we all know how bitter women can get. Just sign the paper, Diana. We ordered you a side salad so you can eat something healthy before you go back to whatever tiny apartment you are renting now." Instead of picking up the pen Brandon pushed toward me, I caught the eye of the restaurant sommelier. He hurried over, recognizing the black titanium card I had discreetly flashed in the palm of my hand. "I will have the Wagyu tomahawk steak, medium rare," I told the waiter, keeping my voice perfectly pleasant. "And please bring a bottle of the 2010 Chateau Margaux." "Are you kidding me? You really came here to squeeze a free luxury meal out of me before I cut you off completely? You are pathetic, Diana. Order whatever you want. I am about to be worth $50 million. A few thousand means absolutely nothing to me." I drew the non-disclosure agreement closer and read the clauses carefully. It could restrict public commentary, but it could not lawfully conceal fraud regulatory reporting or evidence produced under subpoena. Brandon's lawyers had also attached a representation page requiring both sides to identify any intellectual property discussed during the acquisition. I uncapped my pen and added one sentence above the signature block: "Party B, Brandon, personally certifies that he owns or is authorized to sell the AI source code identified in the acquisition materials and that all related disclosures are accurate." I initialed the sentence and pushed the document back. "You need to initial every change before I sign," I said. Brandon barely looked down. The wine was arriving, Patricia was watching, and his vanity would not permit hesitation. He initialed the added sentence, signed the representation page, and passed the agreement to me. Only then did I sign. The clause did not create a crime or erase corporate protections by magic. It created a clear written certification, after direct notice, tying Brandon to the ownership claim he had repeated to investors. If the audit later proved the claim false, he could not plausibly blame an employee or say he had never been asked. Good Brandon smirked. "Now we do not have to worry about you ruining my life." When the dessert plates were cleared, the waiter approached with an elegant black leather folder and placed it in front of Brandon. The bill. I could see the total from across the table: $3,200. Brandon casually pulled his black corporate credit card from his wallet and dropped it into the folder without even looking at the receipt. The waiter nodded and walked away to process the payment. "You better enjoy that steak," Diana Patricia sneered, gathering her expensive handbag. "It is the last time you will ever eat at a place like this. From now on, it is frozen dinners for you." A few minutes later, the waiter returned. He looked slightly uncomfortable. He leaned down and whispered discreetly to Brandon, "I am terribly sorry, sir, but your card has been declined." "Declined? That is impossible," Brandon snapped, his face flushing red. "Run it again. It is a corporate account with unlimited funding." "I ran it 3 times, sir," the waiter replied politely. "The bank indicates the account has been frozen. Do you have another form of payment?" Brandon cursed under his breath, looking highly embarrassed in front of his mother and his mistress. He pulled out his personal platinum card and shoved it at the waiter. "Try that one." "I am sorry, sir. That card has also been declined with a freeze alert." Brandon snatched his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking slightly. He dialed his private banking concierge. "Kevin, pull up the corporate dashboard on your phone right now." "What is going on, Brandon?" Kevin whispered, his voice trembling. "The corporate accounts, they are all locked. There is a notification from Apex Holdings." What notification? Brandon demanded loudly enough that people at the next table turned to look. Kevin swallowed hard. "Apex Holdings just initiated an emergency freeze on 80% of our working capital," They flagged our accounts pending a full financial audit. Brandon, we have zero liquidity. We cannot even pay the server hosting fees for the app tomorrow. I dabbed the corners of my mouth with my linen napkin, picked up my purse, and stood up from the table. The confusion and terror in their eyes was the most satisfying dessert I had ever tasted. Your family ate Brandon, I said clearly, making sure the waiter heard me. You pay. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the four of them stranded at the table, completely broke, entirely panicked, and blissfully unaware that their nightmare had only just begun. The very next morning, the polished glass doors of Brandon's tech startup swung open to admit Victor and his elite team of forensic software auditors. I was not physically present in that building, but I was watching the entire event unfold through Victor, who kept me updated via a secure encrypted messaging channel routed directly to my private server. Brandon had apparently arrived at his office hours before dawn. He was sweating through his custom Italian suit, desperate to prove his company was truly worth the $50 million valuation before the Apex Holdings acquisition could be finalized. He led Victor into the primary server room with an exaggerated swagger, boasting loudly about the revolutionary artificial intelligence architecture he claimed to have built entirely from scratch with his own two hands. Victor maintained his icy, professional demeanor. He did not smile. He did not offer compliments. He simply requested a live compilation of the core algorithm. He needed to verify the source code to finalize the technical due diligence for the buyout. Brandon confidently instructed his lead developer to run the sequence on the main projection screen for everyone to see. According to Victor, the silence in the server room became absolute when the primary displays flashed a series of critical red failure warnings. The system could not compile. It could not execute a single command. It could not even locate the foundational directory. Brandon pushed his lead developer aside and began frantically typing on the keyboard himself, his fingers smashing against the keys in a rising panic. But there was absolutely nothing for the system to find. The intricate, brilliant algorithm that made his entire business function was completely gone. It was currently sitting safely inside the scratched external hard drive resting on my penthouse coffee table. Without my proprietary code, his $50 million tech empire was just an empty digital shell consisting of basic user interfaces and broken links. My private phone rang at exactly 10 in the morning. The caller ID displayed Brandon's personal number. I let it ring 4 times before slowly swiping to answer, placing the device on speakerphone while I calmly poured myself a cup of hot jasmine tea. "Listen to me," he interrupted, completely ignoring my jab because his terror was overriding his ego. His breathing was heavy, bordering on hyperventilation. "We are having a massive server glitch at the office right now. The Apex Holdings auditors are sitting in my boardroom waiting for a live system demonstration, and the primary repository is throwing a massive directory error. I need you to log in and fix it, right this second." I raised an eyebrow at his sheer, unadulterated audacity. Why would I do that? You fired me as your unofficial technical support when you handed me divorce papers and kicked me out of my own house into a freezing blizzard. Besides, you are the visionary tech genius, remember? Just fix your own code. "Diana, please," Brandon begged. The arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by the whining, pathetic desperation of a cornered animal realizing he was caught in a trap. "My lead developer cannot find the root issue. It must be something you accidentally misconfigured when you were messing with the household network before you moved out. I know you know how to navigate the back-end servers. Just remote into the system and patch the directory. I will pay you. I will wire $10,000 into your personal checking account the absolute second the system compiles. $10,000, Diana. That is a fortune for you right now, given your situation." I opened my laptop and stretched my fingers over the sleek keyboard. $10,000, I repeated, letting a perfect, measured note of hesitation slip into my voice to make him believe I was tempted. "You will transfer the funds today?" "Yes, absolutely. I promise on my life," Brandon gasped, relief flooding his voice. "Just log into the admin portal immediately. You remember your old emergency credentials, right? Please hurry, Diana. The Apex team is losing patience. If this acquisition deal falls through today, I am completely ruined. Send me the remote access protocol," I commanded flatly. Within seconds, Brandon emailed a temporary access link approved for the Apex technical review. The link did not give me permission to destroy his system. It activated the audit and step-in rights contained in the original software license rights that applied when the company misrepresented ownership or endangered the licensed code. On my monitor, the empty directory appeared beside the escrow record for my proprietary algorithm. "Are you in?" Brandon asked. "Can you fix it?" "I am in," I said. "But this is not a random glitch. Your company is operating without a valid production key because the ownership certification failed." Using the authorized audit console, I suspended Brandon's administrative privileges pending board review. I did not delete the customer database payroll system or ordinary company files. I isolated the licensed algorithm, preserved the server images, and prevented anyone from altering the financial records while the due diligence team was present. "Diana, what are you doing?" he shouted. "My screen says my privileges are suspended." "I am protecting the evidence and the code you claim to own." The console generated a complete forensic copy of the ledger's access logs and transfer records. The copy moved into the secured acquisition data room, already controlled by Apex and outside counsel. Each file received a timestamp and hash, so Brandon could not later claim it had been edited. As the preserved records loaded, a recurring transfer appeared under external consulting. $20,000 had been paid every month to a so-called virtual brand advisor. The account belonged to Ashley. Brandon continued ordering me to restore the platform, insisting the auditors had no right to inspect private executive folders. I reminded him that he had personally invited Apex into the system, accepted its financing, and certified the company records for acquisition review. Every warning displayed on the console came from agreements he had signed when he needed my capital. The access log showed Kevin approving the transfers and Brandon confirming them. A second ledger traced the money backward, away from marketing and operating revenue, into the employee retirement reserve. What Brandon called a technical problem had become a preserved financial crime scene created by their own permissions and their own signatures. While the progress bar on my download raced toward completion, a specific, highly anomalous financial ledger caught my eye and made me pause. It was a recurring monthly wire transfer, deliberately miscategorized and flagged under external consulting fees. I opened the digital file, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted lines of accounting data. The recipient was listed as a virtual advisor for brand management and corporate synergy. The salary attached to this vague title was staggering. $20,000 a month paid out religiously on the first day of every single billing cycle. I traced the banking routing number attached to the virtual advisor profile. It led directly to a personal checking account registered exclusively to Ashley, his 24-year-old pregnant mistress. I traced the exact origin of the funds paying her exorbitant, unearned salary. The money was not coming from the company operating budget. It was not coming from their marketing reserves or venture capital funding. Kevin had set up an automated malicious script that illegally siphoned the $20,000 directly from the Employee Retirement Pension Fund. The data download completed with a soft, cheerful chime from my computer. I closed the financial directories and entirely severed the remote connection, leaving Brandon's entire corporate network permanently paralyzed, locked, and completely blind. "Brandon," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that was so cold it instantly silenced his hysterical ranting. I highly suggest you stop worrying about the Apex Holdings acquisition. You have much bigger, much darker problems now. I truly hope Ashley enjoys her $20,000 monthly salary while she still has it. It is going to be incredibly difficult for her to spend that stolen pension money from the inside of a federal prison visitation room. As I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the winter clouds roll over the Seattle skyline, my private cell phone buzzed on the marble counter. It was a text message containing a single link to a public social media platform. The sender was an anonymous account, but I knew exactly who it was. Ashley could not resist the urge to gloat. She needed an audience for her unearned victory. I tapped the link, and a high-definition video began to play. Ashley was live-streaming to her thousands of followers. The camera shook slightly before focusing on her heavily contoured face. She was standing in the snowy driveway of the suburban home I had paid the mortgage on for 5 years. She was wearing a white cashmere coat that I recognized immediately from a recent unauthorized charge on a frozen corporate card. "Welcome to my new castle, everyone," Ashley cooed into the camera, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. Her massive, fraudulently purchased diamond engagement ring caught the glare of the winter sun. When your man is a true tech visionary who is about to close a $50 million buyout, he treats his queen exactly how she deserves to be treated. Say goodbye to the bargain bin and hello to absolute luxury. We are upgrading everything this year. You just cannot keep basic, boring people around when you are destined for greatness. She flipped the camera lens to show the entire front facade of my former house. Then she panned to the right, revealing the centerpiece of her boastful broadcast. Parked proudly on the pristine driveway was a brand-new, cherry-red Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. It still had the oversized white dealership bow attached to the hood. Ashley squealed with manufactured delight, running her manicured fingers over the gleaming hood of the supercar. He surprised me with it this morning. This is what real success looks like. For anyone out there stuck in a dead-end job or a dead-end marriage, just remember that upgrading your life is always an option. You just have to know your worth. I did not feel angry as Ashley twirled beside the stolen car. I felt grateful. Her public video connected a visible luxury purchase to the records already preserved in the Apex data room. I downloaded the original stream, saved the public URL, and sent both to Victor so his forensic team could preserve the metadata. Then I cross-referenced the Mercedes purchase date against the ledgers. The match appeared within minutes. Money had moved from the employee retirement reserve, through a company Kevin controlled, and into the dealership's account. Ashley's fake advisory salary, the diamond ring, and the vehicle were all tied to the same pattern. I organized the material into 2 evidence packages. The first documented inflated user metrics false acquisition representations and the attempted sale of intellectual property Brandon did not own. The second documented retirement fund transfers, false tax entries offshore routing, and luxury purchases made for Ashley. This was not evidence for a social media argument or a theatrical call to the local police. Victor submitted the securities material through counsel to the appropriate regulators and delivered the tax records to the IRS whistleblower process. At the same time, he provided the preserved server images to outside counsel already cooperating with an inquiry that had begun after the nursing home documents and suspicious bank reports surfaced. The submissions did not produce an instant raid because I clicked a button. Investigators reviewed the records, confirmed account information through lawful process, and sought warrants from a federal judge. By that afternoon, they had enough corroboration from the existing inquiry to execute search and seizure orders at Brandon's residence and company. The timing felt sudden to Patricia only because Brandon had hidden months of warnings from her. I returned to my legitimate supply chain work and let the agencies handle their own case. I did not direct them to choose charges or decide what they could seize. My role ended with preserving evidence and telling the truth. Near 4 o'clock, Patricia called. Her voice had lost every trace of the wealthy matriarch who had ordered me out of my home.
Diana, what did you do?
She screamed. Men in dark jackets are tearing through the office. They took Brandon's computers, Kevin's phone, and boxes of financial records. Tell them you lied. Behind her, I heard agents giving clear instructions and the scrape of cabinets opening. I did not call a squad car to settle a family dispute, Patricia. Federal agents execute warrants issued by courts. Move away from records and follow their instructions. Make them leave, she cried. This is your jealousy. You are destroying your own husband. Brandon destroyed himself when he certified false numbers, stole retirement money, and hid taxable income. I preserved what he wrote. Investigators decided what the evidence justified. For the first time, she had no insult ready. The silence on the line was broken by a heavy metallic sound outside the house. And, Patricia, I said, you may want to look through the front window. Why? Because the Mercedes Ashley displayed online is tied to the same transfer trail. If the warrant includes proceeds of the fraud, the recovery team may already be taking it. Her scream began before I ended the call. I placed the phone down and looked across Seattle. The victory was not that I had summoned agents with a private command. It was that every luxury item they had used to humiliate me had become an independently verified piece of their own case. Before the call, Victor had walked me through the submission record, line by line. The SEC package contained the term sheets Brandon had circulated, the conflicting ownership schedules, the false user reports, and the board minutes showing that Kevin knew the figures were fabricated. The tax package contained the nursing home invoices, fake payment confirmations, corporate deductions for expenses never paid, and offshore transfers that did not match any legitimate vendor. We included Ashley's video only as corroboration, not as proof by itself. Every file came from a source Apex was entitled to review as lender majority shareholder licensor or proposed acquirer. Victor's team documented who collected it, when it was copied, and where it was stored. The original systems remained available for investigators. Nobody altered a ledger or created a hidden backdoor to manufacture guilt. The most important document was a short email Brandon had sent Kevin after the nursing home demanded payment. "Delay them until the acquisition closes," he had written. "Once Apex wires the money, we replace the reserve and nobody knows." That sentence turned a messy balance sheet into evidence of intent. The authorities also had information I had never seen. A bank had already flagged unusual transfers from the employee benefit account. A former payroll employee had questioned the virtual advisor payments. The nursing home had preserved threatening messages from Kevin. My submission did not invent the investigation. It connected fragments that had been sitting in separate offices. When Patricia called, she still believed the house, the company, and the family name placed her above ordinary consequences. She demanded that I telephone an agency and withdraw the case, as though it were a complaint at a department store. "There is nothing for me to withdraw," I told her. "Search warrants are not favors, and evidence does not disappear because you dislike who preserved it." She called me barren, bitter, and vindictive. I let the words pass. In the background, an agent ordered someone to step away from a laptop. Patricia lowered her voice and asked whether Brandon would be arrested. "I do not decide that," I said. "He had the same choice every executive has. Keep accurate books, protect employee money, and tell the truth under certification. He chose something else." The following morning, I woke up to a perfectly clear Seattle sky, the winter storm having finally broken. I dressed in my usual sensible navy blazer and practical flats, grabbed a commuter coffee, and drove my old Toyota to the downtown logistics center where I had worked for the past 5 years. I did not actually need to be there. As the majority shareholder of Apex Holdings, my net worth eclipsed the entire operating budget of this regional supply chain branch. But I appreciate loose ends being tied neatly, and I had official resignation paperwork to file with Human Resources. The logistics floor was a sea of gray cubicles, ringing telephones and fluorescent lighting. I was quietly packing my few personal desk items into a cardboard box when the heavy glass doors at the front of the office violently banged open. The sharp sound of shattering safety glass echoed across the entire floor, instantly halting the hum of corporate activity. "You think you can destroy my family and just come to work like nothing happened?" Kevin roared, his voice cracking with hysteria. He turned to the stunned coworkers surrounding my cubicle, waving his arms frantically. "Look at her! She plays the quiet, boring logistics manager, but she is a criminal. She stole proprietary code from my brother's tech company. She hacked into our financial servers. She is a corporate spy and a thief." "Are you quite finished, Kevin?" I asked softly. "You are interrupting a very busy shipping quarter." "You are going to prison, Diana," he spat, slamming his hands down on my desk, leaning in so close I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. "The federal agents raided my mother's house yesterday. They took all of Brandon's computers. They froze every single account I manage. I know you triggered the audit. Give me the hard drive with the source code right now, and maybe I will tell the police to go easy on you." Before I could respond, the heavy mahogany door of the corner executive suite swung open. Marcus, the regional director of the logistics branch, stepped out onto the floor. Marcus was a stern, uncompromising man who struck fear into the hearts of every employee in the building. Kevin immediately puffed out his chest, turning toward Marcus with a triumphant sneer. "Are you the manager here?" Kevin demanded loudly. "You need to fire this woman immediately. She is facing federal embezzlement charges." "I am the chief financial officer of Brandon Tech, and she has stolen millions of dollars in intellectual property from my firm." Marcus did not look at Kevin. He did not ask for an explanation or demand to know why a screaming man was disrupting his office. Instead, Marcus walked directly past Kevin, stopped in front of my cubicle, and bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect. Director Marcus said, addressing me with a title my coworkers had never heard before, "Do you want me to have building security handle this disturbance, or should I contact your private details?" Marcus finally turned his cold gaze upon Kevin. "Diana is not a low-level manager. She is the senior executive board member of Apex Holdings, the conglomerate that owns this entire global supply chain network. I answered directly to her, and you are currently trespassing on her private property." I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my blazer, and picked up my smartphone from the desk. "You always talked a big game about being a chief financial officer, Kevin. But a real financial officer would know better than to leave an unencrypted digital trail of their crimes on a basic company server." I pressed play. Instantly, crystal clear audio filled the massive office space, echoing off the high ceilings for every single employee to hear. It was a recording I had scraped from Brandon's hidden servers yesterday, a voice memo Kevin had carelessly left in a digital drop folder. Kevin's voice, loud and unmistakably arrogant, boomed from the overhead speakers. "Look, Brandon, the Apex auditors are idiots. Just inflate the daily active user metrics by 40%. I will hide Ashley's $20,000 salary under the offshore software development budget. We just pull it straight from the employee pension fund. Nobody monitors that account anyway. Just sign the federal disclosures. We will be filthy rich by next week." I tapped my screen again, cutting the audio. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dozens of eyes bored into Kevin, completely disgusted by the casual admission of pension theft and federal fraud they had just witnessed. Kevin began shaking uncontrollably. He backed away from my desk, holding his hands up as if trying to physically ward off the evidence of his own guilt. "That is a deep fake," he stammered, his voice panicked and shrill. "That is illegal wiretapping. You cannot use that." "I do not have to use it," I said, picking up my coffee cup. "The Securities and Exchange Commission already has the original files." The main elevator chimed. A team of federal agents entered the logistics floor with a warrant already bearing Kevin's name. They had followed him after learning he was attempting to confront a witness and recover the audit drive. His decision to storm into my workplace had not summoned them. It had placed him exactly where they could serve the warrant safely. Kevin Wilson, the lead agent, called. Kevin turned toward the fire exit, but 2 agents closed the distance and secured his arms before he reached it. They placed him against the cubicle wall, searched him, and fastened handcuffs around his wrists. "You are under arrest on a federal warrant involving conspiracy, wire fraud, securities fraud, and theft from an employee benefit plan," the agent said. "You have the right to remain silent." Kevin immediately began blaming Brandon. He insisted he was only the chief financial officer, that his brother ordered every transfer, and that the recordings were misunderstood. The agent told him he could address the evidence through counsel. While another agent collected the phone from his pocket, Brandon's name flashed across the screen. Kevin begged them to let him answer. The lead agent activated the speaker and instructed him not to discuss anything beyond requesting an attorney or notifying family of the arrest. Kevin gasped. "The agents are at Diana's office. They have a warrant. Call the corporate lawyers and tell them you approved the transfers." For several seconds, only Brandon's breathing came through the speaker. "I do not know what you are talking about," Brandon finally said. "You controlled the accounts. If money is missing, you acted without authorization. Do not call me again." The call ended. Kevin stared at the dark screen. The brother he had protected, the man whose false numbers he had carried through every audit, had abandoned him in one sentence. "No," Kevin said as his knees weakened. "I did it for the family. He told me the acquisition would replace everything." The agents guided him toward the elevator. He kept calling Brandon's name until the doors closed. I took a measured sip of coffee. Kevin's arrest did not depend on the recording I had played for the office, and it was not a punishment I had ordered. It rested on evidence reviewed by investigators and a warrant signed before he arrived. But his frantic confrontation had exposed one final truth to everyone watching. The moment consequences appeared, the brothers' celebrated loyalty disintegrated. Marcus asked the remaining employees to return to their workstations, while security preserved the reception footage. The agents collected the device containing the original voice memo from the audit evidence custodian, not from my personal phone. That distinction mattered. I wanted no dramatic shortcut that could weaken the case later. As Kevin passed my desk, he looked at me with hatred and panic. "Tell them I cooperated," he pleaded. "Tell them Brandon made every decision. You had years to protect the employees whose retirement money you controlled," I said. "Save your explanation for your lawyer." The elevator doors shut on his reply. By the following morning, Patricia decided she was not going to go down quietly. If she could no longer bully me in the privacy of my former home, she would try to destroy me in the court of public opinion. I was sitting at the marble kitchen island in my penthouse, reviewing international shipping manifests, when Victor sent me an urgent message containing a link to a prominent Seattle business and lifestyle media outlet. The video interview was already trending across local social networks, racking up tens of thousands of views in mere hours. She lied with terrifying, practiced conviction. Patricia claimed I was an unambitious, greedy wage earner who had selfishly refused to give her son a family because I cared more about my low-level logistics job. She told the interviewer that I had contributed absolutely nothing to Brandon's tech startup, but now that he was on the verge of a $50 million acquisition, I was throwing a vindictive legal tantrum to steal a fortune I did not deserve. Ashley even made a highly choreographed cameo in the background, gently resting a hand on her pregnant stomach, looking like the innocent, fragile victim of my supposed jealous rage. "Defamation libel and intentional infliction of emotional distress," Victor announced, his voice tight with professional rage. "I have the cease and desist orders already drafted and ready for a judge's signature. We are going to file emergency injunctions against the media outlet, the interviewer, and Patricia directly. I can have her silenced, heavily fined, and legally paralyzed by the end of the business day." Nobody smears my primary client like this on a public platform and gets away with it. We are not suing her, Victor, I said smoothly, taking a slow sip. We are not sending a single cease and desist order. In fact, I want you to completely ignore the interview and let the media run wild with it. Victor stared at me as if I had suddenly forgotten how to speak English. He set the glass down, shaking his head. Diana, she is actively destroying your public character. She is portraying you as an unhinged, greedy ex-wife trying to extort a brilliant tech CEO. You cannot let her control the media narrative right before the Apex Holdings acquisition goes public. It is a PR disaster that could backfire on our own corporate integrity. I smiled, walking over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Look at the broader financial picture, I instructed, gesturing to the skyline. Brandon is the CEO of a tech startup that is currently under an intense corporate microscope. Just yesterday, his own brother and chief financial officer was dragged out of a corporate lobby in handcuffs by the FBI for wire fraud and pension embezzlement. Today, his mother is on the internet crying about messy family drama and hostile divorces. What exactly does that signal to the financial sector? Exactly, I confirmed, turning to face him. Patricia thinks she is hurting my feelings by calling me names on the internet. She completely lacks the business literacy to understand that every time she opens her mouth to complain about me on a public platform, she is waving a giant red flag to the market. She is broadcasting to every tech blog and venture capitalist in Seattle that Brandon's company is a toxic, chaotic liability managed by an unstable family. Let her play the victim. Let the bloggers attack me. Let the negative press, combined with Kevin's felony arrest, drive the internal stock and perceived value of Brandon's company down to absolute rock bottom. Across the city, Brandon's company was collapsing under several pressures at once. My licensed algorithm remained suspended, Kevin was in custody, payroll accounts were restricted, and the board was reviewing the false disclosures. The proposed $50 million purchase of the entire company was no longer possible. 2 days after Patricia's interview, Victor opened an emergency video conference with Brandon and the independent directors. I listened off camera from Victor's office. Apex has completed a revised risk assessment, Victor said. The original valuation assumed clean books, valid intellectual property rights, stable management, and accurate user metrics. None of those assumptions survived diligence. Brandon insisted the media scandal was personal noise and demanded that the $50 million deal close immediately. He claimed the technology remained valuable and promised the board he could restore it as soon as I stopped interfering. Victor placed the revised term sheet on screen. Apex already owns 60% of Brandon Tech through its earlier rescue investment. We are not offering $3 million for an entire company we already control. The revised offer is $3 million for the remaining 40% equity, specified physical assets, and an orderly restructuring that preserves employee jobs while placing disputed funds in escrow. The amount will not be paid directly to you, Victor continued. It will first satisfy secured creditors, employee benefit obligations, taxes, and approved restructuring costs. Any residual payment depends on truthful final disclosures and court orders affecting the frozen accounts. Brandon's breathing became audible through the speakers. $3 million is an insult. I will find another buyer. You may try, Victor said. But no buyer can acquire intellectual property you do not own, ignore an arrested CFO, or release funds while regulators are examining the books. Apex's offer prevents an immediate shutdown and gives the competent employees a path forward. It does not purchase immunity for you. Brandon threatened bankruptcy. One director reminded him that Apex, as majority shareholder and secured creditor, could seek emergency governance relief and protect the servers without buying his remaining shares. Another stated that the board had lost confidence in his leadership. The revised document is a term sheet, Victor clarified. It records the price and restructuring framework. The definitive acquisition agreement will be signed at the country club after final schedules, creditor claims, and ownership certifications are attached. Until then, no closing has occurred. The distinction mattered. Brandon had not already sold the company before the final ceremony. He was agreeing to bring the remaining 40% and listed assets to a supervised closing, where every representation would be tested. "You have until 5 o'clock, Victor said. "Accept the framework or Apex will pursue its existing shareholder and creditor remedies without purchasing your stake." Silence stretched across the call. Brandon had no working capital, no credible buyer, and no intact story left to sell. "Send the term sheet," he whispered. "I will sign it." I watched Victor transmit the document. Brandon had not secured $3 million for himself. He had accepted the only process that could keep the employees paid and the company alive long enough for the truth to be exposed in public. Victor then reviewed the conditions one by one. Apex would appoint an interim operating committee, protect ordinary customer service, and fund only verified payroll and critical vendors. The pension reserve would be segregated from all executive accounts. The source code license would remain suspended until ownership was acknowledged and a new compliant license was approved. Brandon would receive no management bonus consulting agreement or guaranteed board seat. He protested each condition. He said the company carried his name, that investors bought his vision, and that no one could remove the founder without destroying the brand. The independent directors answered with the audit. They cited canceled employee benefits, phantom users, undisclosed related party payments to Ashley, and Kevin's recorded instructions to conceal transfers. One director told him plainly that the name Brandon Tech had become a liability rather than an asset. Victor gave him one final warning. Signing the term sheet did not erase prior conduct. It only allowed a controlled closing to proceed. Criminal tax employment and shareholder claims would remain with the agencies and courts entitled to decide them. Brandon still accepted. Pride told him he could regain control at the ceremony. Desperation told him $3 million sounded better than zero. Neither voice allowed him to understand that Apex already held the votes that mattered. The ink was barely dry on the revised $3 million acquisition contract before Brandon realized the money would not even cover a fraction of his mounting legal fees, let alone save him from federal prison. Desperation is a powerful motivator. It drives a man to abandon his pride, forsake his ego, and stalk his ex-wife. I was stepping out of the brushed steel elevator into the grand marble-lined lobby of my residential building when I heard the unmistakable sound of his arrogant voice. The lobby of the Pinnacle is designed to keep the chaos of the city strictly outside. It is a fortress of quiet wealth, guarded by highly trained security personnel and a concierge desk that does not tolerate uninvited guests.
"I know she is here,"
Brandon snarled, slamming his fist against the desk. "Her old logistics manager told me she moved downtown. Call her down right now. I am her husband." Brandon spun around. The blood drained from his face as he took in my appearance. I was not wearing the practical, sensible blazers he used to mock. I wore a tailored, slate gray cashmere suit that commanded attention. In my hand was a custom leather briefcase, and resting perfectly on my left wrist was a limited edition Patek Philippe Nautilus watch, a quiet symbol of immense power that cost more than his entire remaining net worth.
"What is this?"
Brandon demanded, his voice cracking as he stepped away from the concierge desk and moved toward me. "What are you wearing? How did you get into that elevator?" "I live here, Brandon," I said, calmly, adjusting the cuff of my jacket to let the diamonds on the watch face catch the ambient light. "It is a highly secured building. You are currently trespassing." "You live here," he echoed, letting out a harsh, manic laugh that sounded dangerously close to a sob. "In the Pinnacle, the penthouses here cost $8 million. You track shipping containers for a living?" His gaze darted back to my wrist. his eyes locking on to the Patek Philippe with a desperate, predatory hunger. The delusion took over completely. He could not accept that I was successful, so his fragile ego immediately constructed a scenario where I was a criminal. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You stole it," he accused, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch that echoed off the high ceilings. "That is the only explanation. You embezzled money from your logistics company, or you stole it from my accounts before the feds froze them. That is how you bought those clothes. That is how you got that watch. You are a thief." I did not laugh, though the irony was spectacular. The man currently facing federal prosecution for stealing his employees' retirement funds to buy his mistress a Mercedes was loudly accusing me of theft. "You have a very active imagination, Brandon," I said, maintaining my perfect, unbothered posture. "Now why are you stalking me?" He closed the distance between us, his desperation overriding his usual arrogance. The smell of stale coffee and pure fear rolled off his suit. He looked absolutely pathetic. The confident tech visionary who had thrown me out into a blizzard was completely gone, replaced by a terrified man drowning in debt. "The buyout money is completely gone," Brandon confessed, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a frantic, unhinged rush. "The federal auditor seized the $3 million the second it hit the corporate account. I have nothing left, Diana. The lawyers are demanding a massive retainer to fight the embezzlement charges. The police towed Ashley's car this morning. She is threatening to leave me, and Patricia's house is being foreclosed on tomorrow. We are going to be homeless." He reached out, gesturing wildly toward my wrist. "Take off the watch. Sell it. Sell whatever stolen garbage you have hidden in that penthouse. You owe me. You are still legally responsible for helping me out of this mess. If you give me the cash for the lawyers, I promise I will not report you to the police for stealing." I stared at him with absolute indifference. He had kicked me out of our home, mocked my career, and replaced me with a younger woman. He had conspired to leave me with absolutely nothing. Now, facing total ruin, he expected me to liquidate my assets to save him from a federal indictment. "I do not owe you a cent," I said. "The settlement you demanded waives support and claims against separately titled holdings, subject to court review and full disclosure. It did not erase fraud, but it documented your insistence on financial separation. You cannot now demand that I liquidate my property to finance the crimes and debts you concealed." Brandon's face contorted with sudden, violent rage. His panicked facade cracked, revealing the entitled bully beneath. "Give me the watch, Diana," he snarled, lunging forward with his hand outstretched, aiming directly for my arm. Before his fingers could even brush the fabric of my sleeve, I smoothly stepped back and raised a single finger. The building's private security team had been watching the entire exchange closely, waiting for my signal. At my silent command, 2 massive security guards in dark suits moved with terrifying speed. They grabbed Brandon by his shoulders, halting his momentum instantly and pinning his arms forcefully behind his back.
Hey!
Brandon shouted, struggling helplessly against their iron grip. "Let go of me! Do you know who I am? I am a CEO! I am Brandon Tech! I will sue this entire building!" "You are a trespasser harassing a VIP resident," the lead security guard stated flatly, effortlessly lifting Brandon off his feet. "Director, do you want us to call the local authorities?" "No," I replied, calmly smoothing my lapel. "The federal authorities already have a very thick file on him. Just throw the trash out onto the sidewalk." "You cannot do this to me!" Brandon screamed as the guards began dragging him backward across the polished marble floor. "I am a millionaire. You are just a boring, useless wage slave. You hear me? You are nothing without me." The other wealthy residents in the lobby watched in disgusted silence as the screaming, thrashing man was hauled toward the massive glass entrance doors. I stood perfectly still, my hands folded gracefully in front of me, watching his humiliating exit with profound, untouchable satisfaction. Just as the guards reached the exit, they paused to trigger the automatic doors. Brandon, panting heavily and red in the face, was forced to stop right in front of the main lobby's electronic directory board. The massive digital screen displayed the building's prestigious layout, exclusive amenities, and ownership details in glowing gold letters. Brandon glared back at me through the glass doors, his chest heaving with exertion, but his eyes briefly flicked upward to the glowing screen right above his head. I watched the exact moment his world completely stopped spinning. The directory read, "The Pinnacle Residential Tower, owned and operated by Apex Trust." Brandon stopped struggling. The name matched the majority shareholder that had frozen the disputed accounts, demanded the audit, and revised the acquisition. His gaze moved from the directory to my private elevator and finally to me. He did not possess the full structure yet, but the first coherent suspicion crossed his face. Apex was not a distant institution, and my presence in its building was not an accident. For the first time, he looked less angry than afraid. The faceless buyer had acquired a voice, a home, and a woman he had thrown into the snow. I offered him one final brilliant smile, raised my hand, and gave him a small, cheerful wave goodbye. The security guards shoved him through the doors, tossing him out onto the cold, hard concrete of the Seattle sidewalk. The heavy glass doors slid shut with a definitive click, sealing me inside my quiet fortress of wealth, and leaving Brandon outside with nothing but the terrifying truth. At 7 o'clock the following morning, my encrypted private phone vibrated on the marble kitchen island. The caller ID was restricted, but the frantic, misspelled text message gave the sender away instantly. It was Ashley. She begged me to meet her at a quiet, upscale French cafe on the edge of the financial district, promising she had information that would change everything. She sounded terrified, completely stripped of the smug, victorious tone she had paraded around in just days prior. I finished my espresso, selected a pristine white designer trench coat that projected absolute authority, and instructed my private driver to take me to the cafe. "You came," Ashley breathed, looking around the cafe as if she expected federal agents to burst through the doors at any second. "I did not think you would actually come, Diana. Please, you have to help me." I signaled the waiter with a subtle gesture, ordered a sparkling water, and then settled my gaze on the terrified girl. "I am a very busy woman, Ashley. My holding company is finalizing the acquisition of a spectacularly fraudulent tech startup tomorrow morning. What exactly could you possibly need my help with?" Ashley let out a choked, desperate sob. "Brandon is going to prison," she whispered, leaning across the table. Her eyes were wide with genuine horror. "He came back to his apartment last night, completely unhinged. He told me everything. He told me that your trust owns his debt, that you are the one who triggered the federal audit. The IRS froze his personal checking accounts this morning. I cannot even buy groceries. The police took the Mercedes. I have absolutely nothing." I rested my forearms on the polished wooden table. "And this is my problem, because I am collateral damage," Ashley pleaded, tears finally spilling over her dark lashes and tracking down her pale cheeks. "Diana, you have to understand. I am just a victim in all of this. Brandon lied to me. He told me he was a self-made millionaire. He told me you were just a bitter, unambitious wife who was holding him back. I did not know he was stealing from his employees. I did not know he was funding our lifestyle with embezzled pension money. If I stay with him, the federal prosecutors are going to drag me into court as an accessory. I need cash," Diana Ashley continued, her voice dropping to an urgent, pathetic whisper. "I know you have it. You are a billionaire. $50,000 is pocket change to you. Just give me $50,000. I need to get out of Seattle tonight. I need to pay for a medical procedure to end this pregnancy, and I need to disappear before the FBI starts handing out indictments." I maintained a perfectly neutral expression, but beneath the table, My hand slipped into the pocket of my coat. I tapped the screen of my smartphone quietly, activating the high-definition voice recording application. I placed the phone face down on the table right next to the salt shaker, its microphone aimed directly at her.
Why are you asking me for medical money?
I asked smoothly, keeping my tone conversational to encourage her to keep talking. Brandon is the father of your child. He paraded you in front of me to prove you were carrying his glorious corporate heir. Surely his mother Patricia would sell whatever she has left to protect her precious grandchild. Patricia Ashley spat, her voice dripping with pure venom. Patricia is a monster. She is the one who orchestrated this entire nightmare. Do not you see, Diana? She hated you. She despised the fact that a working-class girl like you was the sensible legal wife of her precious son. She wanted you out of the family so badly that she did not even care about the truth. I tilted my head, genuinely intrigued by the direction this breakdown was taking. What truth, Ashley? There is no corporate heir, Diana, she whispered, her eyes locking onto mine. Brandon is not the father of this baby. It is Ryan's, Ashley confessed, sobbing openly now. He is a fitness trainer I was seeing on the side when Brandon was busy working late. I found out I was pregnant 4 months ago. Brandon has always been so focused on himself, he never questioned the timeline. He was just so thrilled by the idea of proving his manhood and securing his legacy that he blindly accepted it. I looked at the phone, resting face down on the table, the digital counter silently logging every single devastating word. And, Patricia, I prompted gently, you said she orchestrated this. Ashley nodded vigorously, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Patricia found out. 2 weeks before the blizzard, she saw a text message from Ryan on my phone when I left it on the kitchen counter at her house. She confronted me. I was terrified. I thought she was going to tell Brandon and throw me out on the street. But she did not. Patricia told me to keep my mouth shut. Ashley revealed, her voice echoing in the quiet cafe. She said she did not care who the real father was. She said Brandon needed a justifiable reason to force you into a quick divorce before the $50 million buyout went public. She needed an heir to replace you, and she was willing to use another man's child to do it. She told me to play the part of the devoted, pregnant mistress, and in exchange, she would make sure I lived in luxury for the rest of my life. She used me to get rid of you, Diana. Please, Diana, Ashley begged, reaching across the table to grab my hands. I pulled my hands back before she could touch me, disgusted by her weakness. I told you everything. I gave you Patricia. Just write me a check, $50,000, $20,000, anything. Let me get the medical procedure and leave before this entire family goes down in flames. You won. You beat them all. Just let me go. Slowly, I reached out and picked up my smartphone. I tapped the screen, stopping the recording, and immediately uploaded the crystal-clear audio file to my secure, encrypted cloud server. The soft chime of the confirmation alert sounded like a final gavel strike in an empty courtroom. I am a supply chain executive, Ashley, I said smoothly, buttoning my white trench coat. I do not pay for defective goods, and I certainly do not fund the escape plans of traitors. You made your choices when you stood on my porch and demanded the keys to my house. Now you get to experience the consequences. Thanks for the confession, Ashley. I am sure federal prosecutors will find Patricia's involvement highly fascinating. See you at the contract signing tomorrow. The morning of the acquisition signing was a spectacular display of unearned arrogance. The venue was an exclusive, invitation-only country club nestled in the wealthy outskirts of Seattle, a location Victor had deliberately chosen to feed my ex-husband's towering delusions. I arrived an hour early, coordinating quietly with my legal team and security detail in a private antechamber while we waited for the guests of honor to make their grand entrance. Through the closed-circuit security feed, I watched Brandon, Patricia, and Ashley strut into the country club lobby. It was a pathetic, almost comical sight. Despite facing imminent federal indictment and total bankruptcy, they had dressed for a coronation. Brandon wore a brand new tailored tuxedo that he had undoubtedly purchased on a high-interest credit card. Patricia was draped in a gaudy, floor-length evening gown and excessive diamond jewelry, looking entirely out of place for a 10 o'clock morning business meeting. Ashley trailed behind them, heavily made up and poured into a tight designer dress, though her eyes darted around the lobby with the frantic, trapped energy of a cornered animal. She knew exactly what I was capable of, yet she was too terrified of losing her meal ticket to warn the others. A uniformed concierge escorted them into the VIP boardroom, a sprawling chamber of polished oak, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a pristine golf course. Victor was already waiting at the massive conference table, meticulously arranging stacks of acquisition contracts. Brandon immediately puffed out his chest and swaggered into the room, treating the space as if he already owned it. He pulled out a chair for his mother, who sat down with a haughty, satisfied sigh, adjusting her rings to catch the morning light. "This is much more like it," Patricia announced loudly, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "A proper setting for a proper business deal. It is a tragedy that your miserable ex-wife cannot see you now, Brandon. Imagine the look on her boring little face if she knew you were sitting in a room like this, about to secure a multi-million-dollar buyout. She is probably sitting in a dusty warehouse right now, tracking cardboard boxes." Brandon chuckled, adjusting his silk tie with a smug grin. "Diana lacks vision, Mother. She always did. She is small-minded. But today is about the future. $3 million is just the beginning. Once the Apex Holdings chairman sees my proprietary algorithms and understands my operational genius, he will undoubtedly invite me to join the executive board. This buyout is merely a stepping stone to a much larger empire." He glanced toward the head of the conference table, noticing the single, oversized leather chair sitting empty. He gestured toward it with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Is that the chairman's seat?" Brandon asked Victor, who was calmly sipping a glass of ice water. "Tell him not to dawdle. I have a very busy schedule today, and my fiancé needs to go shopping for a new house." Ashley flinched at the word fiancé, gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard her knuckles turned white. She kept her head down, staring fixedly at the expensive carpet, silently praying for a miracle that was never going to come. Victor slowly set his glass down. He did not smile. His expression was a masterclass in absolute freezing corporate detachment. "The chairman is not a man to be rushed," Brandon Victor stated smoothly, checking his gold wristwatch. "And I highly suggest you lower your voice and temper your expectations. Apex Holdings is not acquiring your company to utilize your genius. We are acquiring it to salvage the physical servers and strip the remaining assets. The chairman is arriving personally this morning for one specific reason: to execute the final signatures and to personally oversee the immediate termination of all Brandon Tech executive personnel." Brandon blinked, his arrogant smile faltering for a fraction of a second before his ego forcefully reasserted itself. "Termination. No. You misunderstand the dynamic here, Victor. The chairman will need me to smooth the transition. I am the face of the company. Once we speak man to man, he will see my value." Victor simply raised an eyebrow, adjusting the collar of his suit. "You are about to find out exactly what the chairman sees in you." Right on cue, the heavy solid oak doors of the VIP boardroom clicked open. Brandon eagerly leapt to his feet, smoothing his tuxedo jacket, pasting on a brilliant, winning smile, fully prepared to shake hands with a fellow titan of industry. Patricia sat up straighter, lifting her chin to project aristocratic grace. Ashley squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact. I stepped through the doorway. I was not wearing a sensible logistics blazer. I wore a masterfully tailored, brilliant white power suit that commanded every ounce of oxygen in the room. A diamond lapel pin caught the light, and my heels clicked with lethal precision against the hardwood floor. Flanking me with terrifying military synchronicity was a team of 6 imposing individuals. 3 elite corporate auditors carrying thick briefcases of federal evidence, and 3 massive private security contractors in dark suits. The silence that crashed down on the boardroom was absolute, suffocating, and magnificent. Brandon stood frozen, his hand half extended in midair for a handshake that would never happen. His winning smile shattered his jaw dropping open as his brain violently rejected the visual information it was receiving. The color drained from his face so fast he looked as though he might pass out. Patricia let out a strangled, undignified gasp. Her hands flew to her throat, clutching her pearl necklace as she stared at me with wide, uncomprehending horror. She looked from me to Victor and back to me, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Only Ashley remained completely silent, burying her face in her hands, entirely defeated. I did not offer a greeting. I did not gloat. I did not acknowledge their pathetic, stunned expressions. I walked with slow, deliberate grace past Brandon's frozen form, feeling the absolute terror radiating off his body. I moved directly to the head of the conference table. I smoothly pulled out the oversized leather chairman's chair, sat down, and folded my hands neatly on top of the mahogany table. I looked directly into my ex-husband's panicked, bloodshot eyes and offered him a bright, terrifyingly pleasant smile. "Good morning, Brandon," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the dead silence of the room. "Please take a seat. We have a company to liquidate." Victor Brandon stammered, his voice thin and reedy, completely devoid of any executive authority. "What is she doing here? Why is my ex-wife sitting in that chair? Tell her to get out." Victor looked up from the closing binders. "Brandon, allow me to make the ownership structure clear. Diana controls Apex Holdings through the trust she established before your marriage. 2 years ago, Apex invested $3 million in Brandon Tech and received 60% of its voting equity. The agreement on this table concerns the remaining 40% and the assets listed in the restructuring schedule." Ashley covered her mouth. Patricia stared from Victor to me as the identity of the investor they had mocked finally became impossible to deny. "No, Brandon," said, shaking his head. "She works in supply chain. She cannot own Apex. She does not understand software." I opened my briefcase and placed 3 records beside the definitive agreement, the original source code registration, the license granted to Brandon Tech, and the Apex investment documents carrying the 60% voting position. "I do work in global supply chain," I said. "I also wrote the predictive engine your developers could never reproduce. I licensed it to the company. I did not give it to you. When your first version failed, Apex supplied the capital and received control because no other investor would accept the risk." Brandon's face emptied. The algorithm, the rescue investment, and the buyer were not separate miracles. They had all come from the wife he called unambitious. Patricia accused me of stealing his fortune. I ignored her and opened the marital papers Brandon had forced me to sign. "Do you remember the blizzard?" I asked. "You demanded a mutual waiver of claims against separately titled trust companies and future earnings. You certified that each of us had chosen separate counsel or declined it, and you insisted the agreement be submitted with the divorce petition." "You tricked me," Brandon whispered. "No. The agreement does not automatically decide every marital issue, and the family court can review fairness, disclosure, and coercion. But it is powerful evidence of what you demanded. You wanted no claim against my trusts and no obligation to share your business. You cannot treat that language as sacred when it protects you and meaningless when it protects me. More importantly, Apex's 60% stake is documented by investment contracts signed 2 years before tonight's closing. Your divorce papers did not create my ownership. They merely exposed how little you understood it." Victor placed the cap table on the screen. Brandon's name appeared beside a minority position reduced by dilution creditor claims and the proposed sale of the remaining shares. Apex already possessed the votes to appoint directors, protect the code, and suspend executives under the shareholder agreement. I slid the definitive contract toward him. The $3 million figure covers the remaining equity and listed assets. The money goes into escrow for creditors, employee benefit restoration taxes, and approved costs. You will receive only whatever remains after lawful claims are resolved. Brandon refused, claiming he would liquidate the company himself.
The lead auditor opened a folder containing the pension transfers, false user reports, nursing home payment records, and related party payments to Ashley. You cannot liquidate assets subject to secured claims and preservation orders, I said. Apex can proceed through its existing shareholder and creditor rights. This closing gives the employees continuity and gives the estate an orderly process. It does not purchase silence immunity or control for you. He stared at the silver pen. Every route he imagined led back to documents he had already signed. You set yourself up, I told him. I simply stopped carrying the consequences for you. Victor then displayed the original board consent from the rescue round. Brandon's signature sat beneath a clause acknowledging that Apex could exercise step-in rights if management falsified reports, misused employee funds, or endangered licensed intellectual property. Kevin's signature appeared beside his as corporate secretary and finance officer. Brandon tried to argue that he had never read the pages. Victor answered that unread contracts do not become imaginary, especially when the signer used the same documents to raise money, impress investors, and claim a $50 million valuation. I reminded him of the question I had asked before signing the marital settlement. Did he truly want each spouse to leave with the entities held in that spouse's own name? He had said yes, because he believed I owned nothing. His cruelty had not transferred the trust to me. The trust was already mine. His cruelty had simply removed the last excuse for pretending he expected a shared financial future. For 5 years, he had mistaken access for ownership. He lived in a house I helped finance, used code I had licensed, spent capital I had invested, and called the entire structure proof of his genius. The closing binders finally separated every layer. "Sign the contract, Brandon," I commanded. Stripping away all pleasantries, the theatrical facade was over. I was now operating with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate executioner. Sign over the remaining physical assets of Brandon Tech for $3 million, or I walk away right now and leave you to the federal prosecutors. "I will not do it," he shouted, slamming his fist onto the table, a final desperate burst of entitlement. "I will not sign anything over to you. I will declare bankruptcy. I will liquidate the servers myself. You will not get a single piece of my company." "You do not have a company to liquidate," I informed him coldly. As the majority debt holder of Brandon Tech, Apex Holdings conducted a full forensic sweep of your shredded financial ledgers last night. We found the missing pension funds. We tracked the offshore wire transfers your brother Kevin desperately tried to hide before his arrest. I tapped the brightly colored folder with my manicured fingernail. But my absolute favorite discovery was the specific allocation of $250,000 embezzled directly from your employee healthcare fund. Money that was supposedly earmarked for medical premiums, but magically ended up at a luxury jeweler in Dubai. "Did you enjoy the ring, Ashley?" I asked smoothly. It is a spectacular shame the federal authorities flagged the serial number. Wearing $250,000 of stolen employee healthcare money is a very bold fashion statement for someone claiming to be an innocent victim. "You bought her jewelry with stolen company money," Patricia shrieked, turning on Brandon like a rabid animal, her aristocratic grace entirely abandoned. "You told me that was venture capital. You told me you were secure. You absolute idiot. You are going to drag our family name into a federal prison." "Shut up!" Mother Brandon roared, his composure totally disintegrating. He grabbed his hair, pacing frantically behind his chair like a trapped rat. I had to do it. The metrics were failing. The investors were pulling out. I needed to keep up appearances so the buyout would go through. As the acting chairman of Apex Holdings, I am initiating immediate executive action, I announced, my voice cutting through their pathetic squabbling like a blade of ice. Brandon, you are hereby suspended as Chief Executive Officer of Brandon Tech, effective immediately. You are stripped of all corporate access security clearances and financial authority. The oak doors opened, and 2 federal agents entered with a warrant issued before the meeting. The lead agent identified Brandon and ordered him to place his hands behind his back. Brandon Wilson, you are under arrest on charges alleging wire fraud, securities fraud, tax offenses, conspiracy, and theft or embezzlement involving employee benefit funds, the agent said. The allegations will be decided in court. You have the right to remain silent and to speak with an attorney. The collapse was complete. Brandon had arrived expecting a ceremonial sale and an executive title. He was leaving under a warrant built from the records he and Kevin created themselves. The agents did not arrive because I ordered a performance. They arrived because a judge had reviewed evidence and authorized the arrest. The federal agents moved with terrifying efficiency, their dark suits contrasting sharply with the opulent wood paneling of the country club boardroom. As they closed the distance, Brandon stumbled backward. His legs hit the heavy mahogany table, and he knocked his leather chair to the floor with a loud clatter. The polished, arrogant tech CEO was entirely gone, replaced by a cornered, panicked child. He whipped his head around, his wild eyes frantically searching the room for a lifeline. His gaze landed on the 2 women who had cheered for his success and encouraged my destruction. Mother Brandon pleaded, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. Call the family trust. Sell the suburban house. Liquidate whatever you have left and get the best defense lawyers in Seattle. Ashley, use the emergency cash we hid in the offshore accounts. You have to bail me out. They cannot take me to prison. They cannot help you, Brandon, I stated calmly, reaching into the pocket of my crisp white blazer. I pulled out my smartphone and placed it gently onto the table. In fact, I think they have done quite enough to ensure you ended up exactly where you belong. You have always been so incredibly proud of your legacy, I continued, my voice carrying a freezing, surgical precision. You paraded this young woman through my foyer, demanding I step aside so you could secure your bloodline. You believed you were building a dynasty, but a competent executive always verifies his assets before making a lifetime investment. I pressed play. Instantly, the crystal-clear audio from the French cafe filled the expansive boardroom. Ashley's frantic, tearful voice echoed off the floor-to-ceiling windows, capturing every single ounce of her terrified confession. There is no corporate heir, Diana, the recorded voice of Ashley wept through the speakers. Brandon is not the father of this baby. It is Ryan's. He is a fitness trainer I was seeing on the side when Brandon was busy working late. Brandon froze entirely. The blood drained from his face so fast, he looked like a corpse. His eyes slowly shifted from the speakers toward Ashley, who was now openly sobbing, pressing her face into her hands. Patricia found out the recorded Ashley confessed, her voice dripping with desperation. She told me to keep my mouth shut. She said she did not care who the real father was. She said Brandon needed a justifiable reason to force you into a quick divorce. She needed an heir to replace you, and she was willing to use another man's child to do it. She told me to play the part of the devoted pregnant mistress, and she used me to get rid of you. Brandon stood perfectly still. The realization of the monumental betrayal fractured his mind. His mother, the woman who constantly praised his genius, and his mistress, the woman he had stolen employee healthcare funds to buy diamonds for, had conspired to make him the greatest fool in Seattle. He was going to federal prison for a child that belonged to a random fitness trainer. A low, guttural sound escaped Brandon's throat. It was not a sob. It was the sound of a man entirely losing his grip on sanity. You, Brandon roared, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged across the space, launching himself directly at Ashley. He closed his hands around her throat, tackling her backward against the wall. Ashley screamed in absolute terror, thrashing wildly as Brandon's grip tightened, his eyes entirely glazed over with madness. The response was immediate and violent. The 2 federal agents and my 3 private security contractors swarmed him in a synchronized wave of tactical force. They hit Brandon from all sides, prying his fingers off Ashley's neck and driving him face first into the expensive carpet. The sharp click of heavy steel handcuffs echoed through the room as they pinned his arms behind his back. Ashley slid down the wall, gasping for air, her heavy makeup smeared across her face in dark, ugly streaks. She touched her bruised neck, weeping hysterically as the reality of her shattered life finally set in. "Get him out of my sight," I commanded coldly, not even standing up from the chairman's seat. The agents hauled a thrashing, screaming Brandon to his feet. He kicked and spat, completely devoid of any human dignity, screaming obscenities at his mother, at Ashley, and finally at me as they dragged him out the heavy oak doors. His manic shouts faded down the country club hallway, leaving behind an atmosphere of total devastation. Patricia suddenly dropped to the floor. The proud, arrogant woman who had worn designer furs and looked down her nose at my modest background was now literally crawling on her hands and knees across the boardroom carpet. She scrambled toward my chair, tears streaming down her deeply lined face, her expensive gown wrinkling beneath her. "Diana, please," Patricia begged, her voice hoarse and pathetic as she reached out, trying to grab the hem of my white trousers. I smoothly pulled my leg back, refusing to let her touch me. "I am sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong about you. Please, you have your revenge. Brandon is gone. The company is yours. Just leave me the house." She pressed her hands together in a desperate plea. "I am an old woman, Diana. I cannot start over. The suburban house is all I have left. You are a billionaire now. You do not need it. Please show some mercy. Let me keep my home." I looked down at my former mother-in-law. I felt absolutely no pity. I remembered her standing in my kitchen, sneering at my clothes, encouraging her son to throw me out into a freezing winter storm. I remembered her vicious media interview, trying to ruin my professional reputation. I picked up the acquisition contract from the table and handed it to Victor, who calmly placed it into his leather briefcase. "You are mistaken, Patricia," I stated, my voice smooth and entirely devoid of warmth. "I do not own your suburban house." Patricia blinked, a small, pathetic glimmer of hope sparking in her tear-filled eyes. "You do not—" "No," I said. "Apex purchased the mortgage debt months ago, but ownership did not change by private command." Patricia had already received default notices. The cure period had expired, and the scheduled trustee process continued after she failed to pay or challenge the sale. The foreclosure sale was completed that morning under the existing notices. The purchaser had secured the property and a licensed crew was inventorying the contents under the possession order. "You have no home left to bargain with, Patricia. Every deadline had been mailed, recorded, and ignored, while you spent borrowed money protecting Brandon's image. This morning was the final consequence, not the first notice." Patricia let out a haunting, broken wail. She collapsed fully onto the carpet, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Ashley remained slumped against the wall, paralyzed by fear and destitution, realizing she was about to be cast out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on her back. I stood up, adjusting the lapels of my immaculate white suit. The auditors closed their briefcases in unison. Victor offered me a brief, respectful nod. The slate was completely wiped clean. The fraudulent empire had been systematically dismantled, and the architects of my misery had dug their own graves with spectacular efficiency. "Victor," I said calmly, turning toward the door, "ensure the severance paperwork for the remaining Brandon Tech employees is generous.
We will absorb the competent developers into the Apex network. Understood, Director. Victor replied smoothly, stepping aside to hold the heavy oak door open for me. I did not look back at the sobbing women on the floor. I walked out of the VIP boardroom, my heels clicking with absolute authority against the polished hardwood, stepping out into the bright, clear morning light to reclaim the empire I had built. The federal agents had Brandon by the arms, their grips unyielding as they hauled him toward the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. The reality of a federal prison sentence, the absolute loss of his wealth, and the spectacular public humiliation finally broke through his towering delusions. His legs gave out. He went entirely dead weight, forcing the agents to halt their march. "Wait!" Brandon screamed, his voice cracking with a raw, guttural panic that echoed off the polished wood paneling. He violently twisted his body, fighting against the handcuffs, ignoring the sharp commands of the federal agents. He threw himself to his knees, right there on the expensive country club carpet, his expensive tuxedo straining at the seams. He looked back at me, sitting perfectly composed in the chairman's seat. His face was a mask of pure terror, drenched in sweat and tears. The arrogant tech visionary was gone. The cruel husband who had mocked my career was gone. In his place was a pathetic, broken boy begging for his life. "Diana, please," Brandon sobbed, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. "You have to stop this. You cannot let them take me away. Remember who we are. We were married for 5 years. 5 years, Diana. We built a life together. You loved me once. You have to remember the good times. You cannot just throw me into a cage." "It was not my fault," Brandon wailed, thrashing slightly as an agent tried to pull him upright. "I was manipulated. It was my mother. Patricia poisoned my mind against you from the very beginning. She hated your background. She constantly whispered in my ear telling me I needed someone better, someone who fit the corporate image. She orchestrated the entire divorce." He gasped for air, his eyes wide and frantic, searching my face for any sign of sympathy. "And the money, Diana? The embezzlement? That was all Kevin. Kevin managed the books. Kevin stole from the pension funds. I am just a visionary. I do not understand corporate accounting. My brother and my mother manipulated me into ruining our marriage. I was under too much pressure. Please, you have the power now. You own Apex Holdings. You can call off the auditors. You can pay the lawyers. Save me, Diana. Please save me." I slowly stood up from the oversized leather chair. I buttoned the jacket of my pristine white power suit, my movements deliberate and unhurried. The federal agents paused, offering me a brief nod of respect, allowing me the space to conclude my business. The entire room held its breath as I walked around the massive mahogany table, my heels clicking with lethal precision against the hardwood floor. I stopped right in front of him. I looked down at the man kneeling at my feet. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, no pity, just the cold, sterile satisfaction of a balanced ledger. "You want me to remember our marriage, Brandon," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, chilling whisper that carried effortlessly across the silent boardroom. "I remember it perfectly. I remember the exact moment you stood in the foyer of the house I turned into a home, looked me in the eye, and told me I was a useless burden. I remember you demanding I sign away my rights so you could secure your fraudulent fortune. I remember you throwing my luggage out into a freezing winter blizzard, laughing as the door locked behind me. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. My fingers brushed against a crisp, neatly folded piece of paper. It was not a legal contract. It was not a corporate audit. It was a simple restaurant receipt. It was the receipt from the celebratory dinner he had hosted for his family just hours before he demanded a divorce.
It was a lavish $3,000 bill he had maliciously forced me to pay with my own modest savings, mocking my inability to afford their luxury lifestyle, humiliating me in front of his mother and his brother while they drank vintage wine on my dime. Instead, I reached out and sharply tucked the folded restaurant receipt directly into the breast pocket of his ruined tuxedo. I stood back up to my full height, towering over the wreckage of his life. I looked at him with a final, brilliant, untouchable smile. "I am very busy, Brandon," I announced, my tone light, crisp, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Try calling an Uber." I turned my back on him. I did not wait for his reaction. I gave a brief, subtle nod to the federal agents. The agents immediately hauled Brandon roughly to his feet. The spark of hope in his eyes violently extinguished, replaced by the sheer, crushing reality of his permanent doom. He realized he was leaving this country club with absolutely nothing but a pair of steel handcuffs and a $3,000 receipt for a dinner he could never afford again. "No, Brandon!" screamed his voice, tearing through his throat as the agents dragged him backward. "Diana, no, you cannot do this. I am your husband." His frantic, manic screams echoed down the polished hallway, mingling with Patricia's pathetic wailing and Ashley's defeated sobs. I did not turn around. I walked gracefully toward the opposite exit, stepping out into the bright, crisp morning air. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung shut behind me with a definitive, satisfying click, instantly cutting off the sounds of their misery. The silence that followed was beautiful. Later that evening, the winter storm had completely passed, leaving the Seattle skyline crystal clear and glowing with electric life. I stood on the expansive glass balcony of my penthouse at the pinnacle, the wind whipping gently at the fabric of my silk evening gown. The city stretched out below me, a vast, glittering grid of commerce, power, and endless opportunity. My encrypted phone vibrated on the patio table with a message from Victor. Brandon had been processed and taken before a magistrate for an initial appearance. The court, not Apex, would decide release conditions. The restructuring had closed, and the court-supervised asset review would begin at dawn. I locked the screen. The board was finally clear. I reached out and picked up a crystal flute filled with perfectly chilled vintage champagne. I held the delicate glass up to the city lights, watching the tiny gold bubbles rise to the surface. For years, I had compromised my own brilliance, trying to fit into a mold created by a toxic, ungrateful family. I had shrunk myself down, quieted my ambitions, and accepted their casual cruelty, falsely believing that blood and marriage required endless sacrifice. I had desperately wanted a family, only to realize I was living with parasites who viewed my kindness as a weakness to be exploited. They thought they had destroyed me when they pushed me out into the cold. They thought I was just a quiet, sensible woman who would fade away into obscurity. They entirely failed to understand that the cold does not kill a predator. It only sharpens its instincts. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the champagne. The taste was sharp, complex, and overwhelmingly victorious. I looked down at the sprawling metropolis. I did not need a fake family. I did not need conditional love built on fraudulent wealth and arrogant deception. I had systematically dismantled my abusers, legally stripped them of everything they valued, and forcefully taken back the empire I had secretly built with my own two hands. I stood alone on the highest balcony in the city, surrounded by silence, wealth, and absolute control. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer a discarded wife. I was the chairman of Apex Holdings. I was the architect of my own destiny, and I was finally, spectacularly, and completely free.